Shortly, our very special guests, MNHS Press authors Patty Wetterling and Joy Baker, will be sharing their story and advocacy work as documented in their book, Dear Jacob, A Mother's Journey of Hope. WCCO and Sunday reporter and Sunday morning anchor Esme Murphy will moderate tonight's dialogue, exploring the main themes of hope and of perseverance. Patty and Joy exemplify the power of working together on a shared cause, drawing from their collective experiences around a life-changing series of events and evidence that took place here in Minnesota, but has had a lasting impact in the lives of children and people across our country. Before we welcome Patty, Joy, and Esme to the stage, please watch this short video that will serve as a brief introduction to their work.
I'm Patty Wetterling.
And I'm co-author Joy Baker.
This is my memoir, Dear Jacob, A Mother's Journey of Hope, published by the Minnesota Historical Society Press. When Jacob was kidnapped, I sank into this dark world of crimes against children. Who would do that? I found myself unable to function. I was dying inside. I started getting letters from kids, and they were so heartening. It's like, never give up looking for Jacob. If my parents quit searching for me, I wouldn't want to go home. That became a turning point for me. I began to fight for the world that Jacob knew and believed in.
Patty inspires everybody to hope. She inspired me to hope. And half the reason I wanted to write about Jacob's case is because I was hopeful it might have a happy ending. I was never really trying to solve a missing persons case. I really was just trying to be a writer. When I found that article about the 5 incidents in Paynesville that had happened between 1986 and 1987, just right away I got this feeling that that was significant and important. So the first thing I did was I called Jared. Jared Shirel was 12 years old when he was abducted and sexually assaulted. And this happened in Cold Spring, which is a town just about 9 miles away from St. Joseph. And so many aspects of his incident were, I thought, very similar to what happened to Jacob. Jared, oh my gosh, he, of all people, made the difference in this case, and those Paynesville victims for coming forward and sharing their stories. And Jared was pivotal in that because he had the courage to go out to those other people and say, here's what happened to me. Let me tell you what happened to me. And do you think that this could be the same guy? And he was right. It was the same guy. Everyone was devastated. Like Minnesota as a whole was just devastated and hopeless. It felt so hopeless. And it was Patty who kind of brought us all out of that.
Everybody has challenges in their life, and how do you get through hard times? We were supported by so many people. I wrote the book to be a helpful tool. Some of the things that kept me going and offering hope to those who are suffering from whatever their life challenges are.
Thank you so much. I'm Esme Murphy. It is an honor to be here tonight to help Patty Wetterling and her co-author Joy Baker tell this remarkable story in a remarkable book. Patty and Joy. I guess the first thing I want to say about this book is it's a wonderful book about a family, and a wonderful family, and there are some members of this family that are here in the audience tonight. Jerry Wetterling is here. There he is. Amy is here. And Lily. And her daughter, Patty's granddaughter, Lily. And also Carmen. And now, Patty, if you can just tell us, maybe by starting with, tell us about Jacob.
Oh, gosh. Sometimes people get caught up in this story and they forget sort of who we were. Jacob was our second born, Amy's the oldest, and Jacob and Trevor and Carmen. And he was delightful from the beginning. He loved to go, we used to go to this Mexican restaurant, and he loved guacamole. Who knew? Jerry nicknamed him Jacamole. He slept a lot, and I thought when he started kindergarten that he wanted to go to afternoon kindergarten, and I thought he'd fall asleep because that was his nap time, but he didn't. Jacob was a really good student. He had a lot of great friends. He was good at sports, all sports. He liked to organize the neighborhood into football tournaments and games, and just was lots of fun. He played hockey early on, and about 2 years, well, about 1987, he decided he wanted to be goalie, and I'm like, how can you do that to your mom? That's really, really not fair. I learned to count shots on goal so that if they lost, I could still say you had 17 saves, I asked him if it bothered him if somebody scored against him, and he was like, no, not really. If it went in, it was a great shot. If I stopped it, that was a great save. I mean, it was just fun. He was a great big brother, younger brother. He played dolls with Amy, and it was never Barbie and Ken, it was Barbie and He-Man. But he was just a great sport about everything.
And I think what struck so many people when this happened is they saw the pictures of your family and Jacob and his brother and sisters. And one of the things that gripped this entire state, even the entire nation, is that what happened to Jacob was so rare.
Yes, there's a lot of missing children, but the smallest percentage is stranger abduction. As a matter of fact, for the longest time, they thought it might be somebody that knew us. Statistically, it's more likely it's somebody that you know, at least casually, that harms a child or takes a child. So that was part of the investigation. But it was a random stranger abduction on a dark country road, half a mile from our house. They were on bikes. They had permission to go to the store. They got a video of some candy, and on the way back, they were confronted by a masked gunman. That's the other thing. It's typically, nobody knows what happened. A child just disappears, but we knew what happened right away. There were witnesses, his brother and his best friend. So it really was shocking to our entire community, and I'd say state, because it is so strangely odd.
Right. We're going to get to Joy in a minute because there's an extraordinary amount of time before Joy comes into the story, but then she is sort of the heart of how this path led forward to a resolution. I want to ask you, in all those years, I don't think you ever turned down an interview. You never turned down a request. You went over it again and again. How did you find the strength to do that?
I think the very first night, a friend of ours came over. He had watched a show on TV, and he said this child came home because somebody saw him on TV. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children said that's the number way kids are found, is somebody recognizes their picture, and they see a situation that doesn't look right, and they call the police. So we tried in every way possible to get Jacob's story out through the TV, newspapers, radio. I like radio because they're on the road, you know, and they're everywhere when you're talking about it. So yeah, we did. That was our best source of hope of getting him back, was media.
And obviously, this happened in 1989. Within a couple of years, you and your advocacy went national. You actually began advocating for missing children all over this country. Tell us about that, because I think there are a lot of people, most of us would not have had the strength to go there. How did you get into that path?
Initially, there was a missing child in California, David Collins, and his dad had set up an organization. So he came and talked to us about setting up a nonprofit so we could keep going. And then I asked the investigators, what do you need? What would have helped you find Jacob? And this detective said two things: a central repository of information, one call-in center where everybody, all law enforcement could access. And the second thing was sex offender registration. There were only 6 states who had that at the time, and it was like letting law enforcement know who was out there who had committed these types of crimes. That is the #1 motive behind kidnapping, is for sexual purposes. And so we went to the state capitol and we got it passed in 1991 so that law enforcement would have, time is your enemy, and they would know right away who lives nearby, and they could rule them in or rule them out. And then after that, people kept calling the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children and saying, which states don't have registry, because my brother is trying to decide where he's going to live when he gets out. And I thought, oh, we can fix that. So Senator Durenberger and Congressman Ramstad helped us. I didn't do any of this alone. We had a great amount of support along the way, and that was part of the 1994 crime bill.
One of the things that is so remarkable about this book is that Joy Baker and Patty are able to really detail the 20 years that took place before Joy came into the picture. And why don't you say, Joy, how you first started to write about Jacob, because it's a remarkable bit of the story.
So I started my blog in 2010, and it had nothing to do with Jacob Wetterling. I was writing a story about an old rundown beach house in Florida, and I had started my blog just as simply as a tool to start writing. I wanted to figure out how to become a writer. I'd been in marketing for my entire adult life, and I had been running an advertising agency in Wilmer for 20 years with my best friend from college. And when we celebrated that 20-year anniversary, I just thought, oh dear Lord, I can't do this for another 20 years. I was not sure I could do it for another 2 weeks at the time. So what I did was I just gave myself some time, and I gave myself another year. And at the end of that year, I just couldn't do it. I sold my half of the business to my friend, and I said, I'm going to figure out how to be a writer. So I gave myself 1 year. So all of 2011, I was writing and blogging and having so much fun, and I was trying to figure out something new to write about after that beach house story had run its course. But by then I had fallen in love with blogging and the interactivity of it. And it was through the people's help. The blogosphere was kind of weighing in and helping me with that first story, and I wanted to find another story where that could happen again, that might have the possibility of a happy ending. So I think I just Googled Minnesota mysteries, and of course Jacob's story came up. And I had just been sort of looking into it, and then suddenly, all of a sudden, there was this big break in the case where they named a person of interest who was a neighbor down the road.
This is in 2010, so we're going...
Oh, 2010, yeah. So
that's 21 years now. Mm-hmm. It's been 21 years. They name a person of interest who is the man who lives at the end of the driveway where Jacob was abducted. And that got you interested in the case.
It did. So yes, and that what happened was in 2013, that gentleman, that person of interest, got hold of me and said, would you like to hear my side of the story? And I thought, no, I sure don't. But curiosity got the better of me. So by then I had, my loving husband had strongly suggested I go back to work instead of try to be a writer. So he's here, thank you, honey. So I did. I went back and I was fortunate to get a great job as the marketing director at our local hospital. So that's where I was working when I had the opportunity to attend a gala, charity gala, where Patty Wetterling was the keynote speaker. And that was my first time meeting her.
And by this time you had started blogging about Jacob's case. What you're looking at here is a page from her blog. And about in 2012, people like me started noticing this blog. There were so many resources that media, all media, put into trying to help solve this mystery, trying to find evidence. And suddenly this blog by this hospital administrator in New London was alive with people talking about what had happened and what was going on at the time. Meanwhile, Patty, how did you first find out? And I know you were a little skeptical.
Not a little. No, she introduced herself and gave me her card, and, you know, but it also had, what did you have on your card? It was not hospital stuff, it was a writer or something.
Right, so I had introduced myself as being the marketing director of the hospital, but I handed her my Joy the Curious blogger card, and I think she went, red flag, red flag, red flag, red flag.
So I'd been in Washington, D.C. I actually drove from the airport to Wilmer and changed in the bathroom to get ready for this gala. And so I was on my way home, and I got home, handed Jerry the card, and said, I just met this lady. She's got a blog. I'd never read a blog. I seriously did not know this. You got to go back in time. This was early. She was one of the earlier blogs. So I went to bed, and in the morning I got up, and Jerry said, well, there goes your book. She's written it. And I'm like, so then he read me the blog. This was the first part, because she'd stopped for a while, and then so we had a long, probably 2.5-hour phone call, and I didn't understand. You have to understand that for a lot of years, 24 years by now, we'd been approached by a lot of people. Some wanting to write the book, some writing without any input from us, and when we'd ask them not to. So I was skeptical, and also I'd worked with law enforcement for a lot of years. They teach you skeptical when you hang around them too long. You don't trust automatically, so we emailed back and forth a little bit, but it was a year. It was a year.
At one point there was a comment
oh yeah, I'll get to
where you
that.
said, okay. Well, I remember asking you, because I became a fan of Joy's blog because there was so much information on it. In these pages, there'd be comments, and you'd read all the comments. And I remember asking Patty, well, what do you think of this blog?
Well,
and your response was, well, just kind of strange. This is all strange. but you went beyond that in one conversation with Joy.
Well, by this time she'd talked to the neighbor. She had talked to Jared. She found Jared, who we sort of adopted. He was a victim before Jacob, and we thought the cases were related, but there was no evidence really linking them at that point. She had talked to, let's see, Jared, some of the Painesville, well, no.
Not quite yet. So I had talked to, yes, the person of interest. I talked to someone else who was a witness / maybe a person of interest, because he had left his tire tracks in the driveway, and so that turned the whole investigation on its head, which made the other guy a person of interest. And I put them together at Panera Bread one morning, and so we sat down and had a long conversation. And then by the time I found Jared, because I'd never heard of Jared before, I had never heard of this young man who'd been abducted 9 months prior until I started looking into the case. And I by then had made the decision that I only wanted to talk to people who had a direct connection to the case. So I was talking to neighbors. I was talking to really anyone who had a direct connection. And Jared, I very much wanted to talk to. So just with some genealogy skills and a tidbit that I'd found in an article about when his birthday was, I found 2 Jareds that had been born in Stearns County on that date. And I took a stab that it was one of them, and I got lucky. And as it turns out, Jared and I had a mutual friend on Facebook. I mean, I grew up in Brooklyn Center. There's no reason Jared and I should have a mutual friend on Facebook, but we did. And so just so many coincidences like that.
So then Jared thought it would be a really good idea for him and these other guys to sit with Trevor and Aaron. And I said, no way, done. We're not, done. And I thought, who is this woman? She's talking to everybody. And I called her and I said, well, what if I did this to you? And I talked to coworkers and neighbors and friends. I feel rather like I'm being stalked.
Well, from that point, Joy continues, but the blog is just, I would read the blog every day. And Joy in 2013 came upon something that for all the investigative work that all the reporters who had looked at this had never found. And it was an article from 1987 in the Painesville Press. And there was a map earlier up there that showed the location of Painesville in relation to St. Joe. And tell us about that, because this is a find that would really lead to the case being cracked wide open several years later. It took that long. But tell us, how did you find that, Joy?
Well, by the time I found Jared, and by the time Patty thought I was a stalker, I very much wanted to quit because I felt so badly about that. I felt horrible, and I, for the first time, really kind of saw myself through her eyes, and so I really wanted to walk away, but Jared would not let me. By that time, I had kind of opened Pandora's box, and he was on fire, and he wanted to find a picture of this early suspect that had intentionally never been shown to him because they didn't want to show him or sway his opinion on a lineup. So I was scouring newspapers trying to find a picture of this early suspect, and that's when I was going through I didn't even know Painesville Press had an archive. Someone told me that. I just got a tip on my blog about that. So as I was going through, I came across this May 1987 article about these 5 unsolved cases on young teenage boys who had been chased or groped, molested after dark by a man in a mask, dark clothes, and he would often grab these guys off their bikes in a group sometimes and say, don't look back or I'll blow your head off.
What you're seeing here is a map that shows Stearns County, and you see St. Joe, where the Wetterlings live, and you see Painesville. It is what, maybe 20 miles, Patty? 30 miles. It's very close. And no one had heard of these molestations of 5 boys being attacked together. Some were on bikes. Jacob had been on a bike with other boys. It was really a bombshell. And I remember doing a story with you, Patty, and showing you the police report. And what were the things that you said when you saw that?
Well, I had never heard of those cases. Like I said, that one detective had asked for 2 things. One was a central repository of information. So if you wanted to know other incidents, you had to go to every single law enforcement agency or sheriff's department, look through paper files to see. But Joy discovered these other victims, and I was shocked. And meanwhile, all these years I was on the board for the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. I'd been doing law enforcement trainings around the country, so I knew that these had very high probability of being related to what we were looking at. What I loved about Joy's blog is that Joy the Curious. That curiosity just kept, well, gee, I wonder about this, and she would go to the next step. So then she made a map of where all those victims were.
I believe this is the map of the attacks in Painesville. Is that right, Joy?
It is. And so, Jared, you mentioned that nobody had ever heard of these cases before. Well, the kids especially in Painesville had, because they were terrified.
The kids who are now middle-aged men.
Yes.
Or young middle-aged men.
But they grew up with the fear of, they all called him Chester the Molester. And there was this man running around molesting kids and grabbing them and scaring the bejeepers out of them. And so when Jared heard that story, I got a hold of him right away and said, Jared, have you ever heard of these cases? And he said he had not. So he asked me to turn that over to send it right up to Stearns County Sheriff's Department, which I did. But he said, you know what, I think I've heard of some of these cases. Let me ask around. Don't blog about this. So he started asking around town, because by then he had moved back to Paynesville. His family moved them back there from Cold Spring, out of the frying pan into the fire, not knowing. So he started talking to some people, and all of a sudden it was, you know, that happened to my nephew. I think that might have happened to my brother. You know, we don't talk about it much, but I have a cousin. You know, it was just boom, 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 boom. And I had parents reaching out to me, and suddenly we had 5 cases, then 6 cases, then 7 cases, then 13 cases. It just exploded.
And this is something that is all developing on her blog. You're bringing it to Stearns County. At one point, though, they have focused on this neighbor, the person of interest, who was named. This is a middle school band teacher. You can imagine what his life was like, being named the person of interest in the abduction of Jacob Wetterling. And Patty and Joy felt pretty strongly that this was not the guy. And you, Patty, even though you've always been very gracious to law enforcement, there is a part in the book, and the book doesn't hold back, but there is a part in the book where you and Jerry go and confront law enforcement and say, I want this investigated, these Paynesville cases.
That was part of it. But we were approaching 25 years, and how do you even plan a 25th anniversary anniversary is a bad word, acknowledgement of this horrific crime. So we went, Jerry and I went down to the sheriff's department and asked the sheriff, it's like, no offense, but you've had this for 25 years. We wanted the team back. At the beginning, we had the FBI, the State Crime Bureau, the BCA, we had the Tri-County Major Crime Unit. We've had visitors from the National Center come, but suddenly, I mean, not suddenly, but over time, it was just Stearns County, and we wanted more. So we asked them if we could bring everybody back, and they did. He called a meeting, and we're all there. All those agencies are there, and some Stearns County investigators, and his intro was, Patty's upset. Go ahead, Patty. Like, okie dokie, yeah. Gotcha.
But what Patty was upset about was that these cases that had been uncovered in this blog that were now beginning to get media attention on stations like mine were not being looked at and reopened in the way that you wanted them. I would say they weren't being looked at all at that point, but you might be more gracious, Patty.
No, that is true. He had a person of interest, and he was focused
completely on this neighbor.
On that, and so we knew that leads. I knew Joy was turning them in, and I'd ask about some of these, and I knew that they didn't investigate because they would tell. You know, they would tell us nobody's come to talk to us. So it was frustrating at that point, and that's my message to law enforcement: don't ever get locked into something that you're not open to other things at that point.
And by this time, you were not only coming at this from being a mom, you were by then really a national figure when it came to missing and exploited children. You, in these years intervening, had worked with J.C. Dugard's family, Elizabeth Smart's family, so you knew, you did know that these cases didn't make sense and that they should have been publicized.
Right, and at the time, I was chair of the board for the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, so I worked with them in all of their aspects of investigation and long-term missing and all of that. So we, at this point, became a team. Jared thought we should all be together in his wonderful bring people together way, and so he invited us all to Joy's house. And that's when Jerry and I went there. We picked up Jared, and he drove us through Paynesville. It was chilling to show us where these other victimizations had happened. And then we went to Joy's house, and we hadn't met in person since that gala years before. And so we drove up to this lovely home and walked inside, met her husband Ross, and she had pictures of her kids on the walls, and she really looked normal. Thank you. I mean, I needed that. Who was this person, you know? But at that point, I saw she was asking questions nobody was asking anymore, and she was really digging in a concentrated effort. And she's right, Jared was on fire because he never knew who victimized him either. The guy, pushed him into the back of a car, and the car light was on this much.
And Jared's case happened in Cold Spring,
10 miles away.
which is 10 miles away. So you've got this triangle of cases that are so suddenly, after 20 years, there it is. There's St. Joe, there's Cold Spring, where Jared was abducted just 9 months before Jacob, but he was let go. He was molested, but he was let go and told not to look back or the person would shoot. And then you had the Paynesville cases. And you pushed. I mean, this is a book about you and your family not giving up and pushing and demanding some answers of law enforcement. Eventually, you got another meeting with law enforcement, a phone call from them.
Yeah, when that team came back together, the FBI revisited our case and also Jared's case, and then they reran some clothing, and they had a hit on the man who took Jared, which is not the guy he thought it was. The one she was investigating was a different man who was in prison. So I think that police thought that they'd gotten their guy, and they didn't investigate after that, but they should have. So you're talking about the phone call in
Well,
2016.
you essentially are saying this is the theory that has to be explored, that the Paynesville cases, Jared's case, and Jacob's case are linked. There are too many similarities. And you may not have known it, but you actually had convinced them because in papers that have been released later, they brought the team back together, and they did go back to the first step. And at one point, I believe it was in 2015, you got a phone call.
Right.
You and Jerry got a phone call.
Right. We knew that the team had come back because the FBI, it was a result of that meeting, the FBI sent a team that does cold case review. And so we knew that they were working on a lot of things, and we got a phone call saying that, first they did a search warrant of this guy after they knew that's the one who took Jared. They had a search warrant, and then the phone call came after the guy was arrested. I'm sorry, I'm scattered. The man who assaulted Jared was, they did a search warrant, and they found all kinds of pornography. So he was in jail.
Right.
And so it was 10 months later that we got that horrible phone call.
Right. So in terms of the pushing, what they went back to the beginning, and Joy, they began to see that there was somebody who had been arrested back in 1989 in Jared's case, and then was let go because he lawyered up, essentially. And they started to hone in on him.
They did. So when they investigated that man, they saved, number one, some tires from his car. They saved some tennis shoes that he owned, and they also got
back in 1989 they did that.
Yeah, and they saved some of his hair samples for future DNA. And so then, in 2015, when at their insistence, at the Wetterlings' insistence that this team come back together, that team went back to look at that guy. They took those hair samples, and they went through Jared's clothing that also had DNA samples on it. They found a hit that matched one of those hair samples from Jared's clothing.
So Jared's case linked. They also went back and looked at the tire and looked at the footprint, and it matched with this man who had been arrested and let go in 1989, named Danny Heinrich. It matched, but it wasn't enough of a match. And explain that.
It visually matched, but there was no nick on the tire or tear on the shoe to make it uniquely his. In other words, if you went to Sears and bought that same tire, it could have been you. So it wasn't enough to arrest him. Same thing with the shoe. Anybody who wore that size shoe, it could have been. There was no unique factor. It wasn't enough to arrest him, much less convict him. So, but it was enough to get the search warrant, and
Right.
that's when they went in and got the house. And that, incidentally, they couldn't charge him on Jared's assault because the statute of limitations had run out,
So-
which had been changed, but that was devastating for
I think
Jared.
it's devastating to Jared, and still is. So in 2015, this man, Danny Heinrich, is arrested, but only, I say, on child pornography charges, which is very, very serious.
Yes, federal charges are stiffer than
Yeah.
Minnesota law.
Right. And what happened between, he was arrested in October 2015, Jacob was found the following fall in September. But what happened in the final months was an extraordinary legal negotiation that is unprecedented, in which the Wetterlings played a very active part, agreeing to a plea deal in return for getting information from this man. I know this is not the area that's hardest, but it was extraordinary, and it must have been, and you write about it in the book, you don't hold back in the book, but you were pushing it and pushing it. How did you and Jerry have the strength to keep on getting through that?
For nearly 27 years, we were searching for Jacob, and we had been offered before, do you want justice or do you want answers? And they knew our answer. I wanted Jacob. I'll let the rest of the world deal with the guy. I just wanted our son back. And so when we got this phone call that the guy was willing to make a plea, we went down to Minneapolis with our lawyer. It was actually Jared's lawyer who volunteered to become our lawyer. We didn't need a lawyer all that time. Why would we ever need a lawyer? We never went to court. We never had, so he became our lawyer as well, Doug Kelly, the most amazing man. Anyway, so the plea was that he would fess up to he would admit to one count of child pornography, but give us answers to where was Jacob and what happened that night. And we agreed to that. There was no way we were going to find Jacob without this guy telling us.
And this is what the book goes into, is the strength of pushing for that kind of a negotiation, which is something that I have never heard of in 40 years of covering cases, and I've never heard of anything even close to this. And Jacob came home.
We found him that same week.
Okay. And after that, and you're very honest about in the book, that wasn't one of the darkest times.
Oh, absolutely. I was lost. My whole life work had been with missing and exploited children. I was the messenger of hope. Don't give up on these kids. I'd met kids who came home. I met J.C. Dugard and Elizabeth Smart. 17 years, 9 months, 5 years, 10 years, the Cleveland women, 10 years. I've met all these people. And I knew there were missing people out there, and we had to find them. So my hope was strong until we knew that Jacob wasn't coming home alive. And I was lost. Who am I now? It felt like I had this life of futility. Nothing had meaning. Everybody got to go back to work, but my work was gone in a way. So it was a very dark time for me, and Joy kept asking, I think we should get going again, and I didn't even want to write a book. The whole purpose was to help find Jacob, and now he was home, so I had lost focus, and she kept nudging me and gently giving me assignments. Oh, and then there's the mail. I saved all the mail. We didn't know who did this. So did the guy who did it send us something? I saved all the mail. Some of it was mouse-eaten in the garage, but it was still there. And Joy had a friend photographer come, and we just spread everything out, and I found more after that.
But you two began writing the book. You went to a friend's cabin, wrote the book. What was that like, Joy? Because the book, you feel like you are with Patty and Jerry Wetterling and their family throughout this 27-year process. How were you able to create that?
When Patty first asked me to help with this memoir, she had already kind of started it over the years, little bits and snippets that she'd collected and written, but she hadn't really sat down to, think it through or what it was going to look like. And so she asked if I would just help her get organized. And so that's all I was in the beginning, was just an organizer of stuff. And there was a lot of stuff. A lot of
There's the stuff.
That was some of the stuff I brought home. That was the first load that filled up my car. And so then the first thing I did was go to my very favorite place on earth, and that is the Container Store in Edina. And I started organizing this stuff, and I was very proud of myself. I got airtight, mouse-tight, watertight containers. And because it was so important, the stuff I felt was so very important. And so that's kind of how I started. I was just an organizer, and then a cheerleader, and then kind of a coach. I was a writing coach at some point, and then it really became more of a co-author at some point. I was an editor, and I mean, it took a lot of years. It took us 8 years to write this book, and I think after Jacob was found, it was so very difficult, and Patty was just so lost, and I've broken, really, and going through grief, and then there was the public release of the investigative file, which was horribly painful for so many people, and so anyway, there was a lot going on, and one day I got this phone call from a friend of mine, who's actually a friend of a friend. This is another just serendipitous moment in this journey, and she said, "Joy, this is so very important that you guys finish this book." She said, "Patty needs to finish this memoir. We want to offer you something." And they have a cabin, and they said, "Would you please just use our cabin, go use it as a retreat space. It's peaceful. It's right on Lake Coronis in Paynesville." And so that's where we got started again, was Paynesville. And it was an amazing, amazing gift, and it's exactly what we needed.
You write this book. I'm sure there are many, many publishers that would have loved to publish this book. Why Minnesota Historical Society Press?
We were so excited to be here. This was the best place on earth. Jacob changed Minnesota history. Everybody in the state lived through this in their own stories, and as we've been signing books, you hear the stories. I was 7 years old, and this happened, and everybody was part of it. We had been approached by a group, a couple, but one was in New York, and they were young and aggressive, and they were really kind of all about true crime, which turned both of us off. We're not writing this book so people can be entertained by these vast, horrible crimes. So when we got the call from Minnesota Historical Society Press, Joy's at her house and I'm in mine, we were dancing, really, literally. We trusted the integrity. We worked with Anne Regan. She had helped us along the way. Somebody had wanted to have us write the book or have Joy write the book. A lot of people were asked to write the book, and Joy said, "No, Patty's writing the book." I really had no knowledge of how to write a book. I was a math teacher, I knew how to write, and I had written, but I didn't know how to put it all together, and it wouldn't have been a book without Joy's constant friendship and nudging and order.
But let's be clear, I had never written a book either.
Now you have.
So I kept saying, "Patty, if someone comes along who knows what they're doing, I think you should go with them, because I don't know what I'm doing." Yeah. So thank God for Anne. Oh my gosh, thank God for Anne. She really did help us.
For those who have not read this book, it's gripping, and it is a tale of it's a mother's journey of hope. It's a mother's journey of persistence and never giving up and calling people out when they had to be called out, and pushing for things and pushing for children, because in the end it was about the children of Paynesville who had not been heard, and Jared, who really had never been heard.
And it was, honestly, for me, it was a battle. It was this guy who'd done this horrible crime, and I was fighting for the world that Jacob knew, the world where people were kind and fair and gentle and supportive of one another. And I really refused to let that guy take away my belief on the way the world should be. We can fight for that if we know it.
And this has been a guiding light for Patty. There's so much that we've glossed over that she's done. She founded the Jacob Wetterling Resource Center, which has done education throughout the state of Minnesota. And they came up with 11 for Jacob, and we've got it right here.
One of my friends at the National Center, her nephew wanted to, after Jacob was found, put an 11 on his cheek for a soccer tournament, because that was Jacob's number. And they called us, Jerry and I, and asked if it would be okay. And we said that was awesome. I love being led by children. So they came up with 11 things, and we have a whole video, a very long video of this that you can watch at the Jacob Wetterling Resource website. But everybody rallied because there was so much trauma with the expediency of him being in court, admitting to it, and about 5-6 weeks later he's sentenced. I mean, when does that happen? It's usually years between one thing and another, and it was so fast. So everybody rallied about what can we do, and jerseys showed up, the Minnesota Vikings and the Twins and the Wild and all of the sports teams wore 11. Schools wore it. One of the 11 attributes is be gentle with others, and I was in a school, and it was written on the poster, and it was kind of messy, so I went up close. It was on blue paper. It was written in Band-Aids. These kids get it. Be gentle with others. They get it. We need to be focusing on how we're raising people to be kind and considerate and good friends, and not cause these horrible crimes to happen.
The book is remarkable. It really is. It's a story of courage and hope, and how anybody, a hospital administrator from New London, and a mom, and a determined mom at that, can really change the world and change how things are looked at in terms of children that are missing and exploited.
We were supported by Jared, who's a plumber, and Jerry, the chiropractor. So
there you go.
It was quite the blend.
It was a team. Well, listen, I wish to offer a big thank you to our audience tonight who joined us virtually or in person at the History Center, both here in the 3M auditorium as well as those gathered in the classrooms in our education wing. There is a huge overflow audience. For our virtual audience, please enjoy a brief video before signing off this evening.
After Jacob was found, one of my friends called from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and her nephew wanted to put 11 on his cheek for a soccer tournament. That was Jacob's favorite number and his soccer jersey number. But they decided that it should stand for the things that they'd heard me describe Jacob to be. So we together, collectively put together the 11 attributes for Jacob and the way he lived his life. Jacob would come home from school and tell me about something that wasn't fair, and it would bother him so much, even if it had nothing to do with him. So the very first one I put down was to be fair. Be kind. Be understanding. Be honest. Be thankful. Be a good sport. Be a good friend. Be joyful. Be generous. Be gentle with others. And be positive. I truly believe if we encouraged our children to live these 11 attributes, we would have a better, safer world for all of us.